Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the next episode of Stream Time Sports. My name is Chris Stone, the community lead, joined as always by our CEO, Nick Meacham. Now, Nick, as we record this, the Cincinnati Bengals are now on a 4-game losing streak, still with the absence of Joe Burrow. Although I will say, I thought Joe Flacco looked as good as he could have looked. But I am under the understanding, based on your outfit, that you have something celebratory or more positive news than I can share about any team I support.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm not that happy with the Bengals because I have Joe Burrow and his backup, and they brought this Joe Flacco guy in now, my backup. So I have no quarterbacks basically to start at the moment. So I'm in a bit of trouble. But yes, I am, for those watching, or those not watching, I'm wearing, I think, my only AFL related clothing. Oh, no, I actually have one, a jersey, they call it. And for the Brisbane Lions, I'm currently wearing it, which is not really my team, but kind of is my team. I'd say it's definitely my second or third team, top three, which makes me, you can make your own judgments. But I've been out of the country a long time, so I've lost too much, lost the fandom. But basically, they won the grand final as we were recording this just the other day, and actually have a bit of a history connected with the club through friends and so forth. So it's I've always kept they always have a very strong soft spot. I had a friend from when I used to live in the desert in the middle of nowhere, who I used to do loads of sports with. Broken Hill, not
Broken Hill, broken knee. Maybe I'm thinking about my own
Broken
knees.
Knee's even better. Broken Knee's an even better name. Broken Hill. And we used to do sports together and everything else, and heard nothing from him. Then he popped up and he was one of the leading players for the Brisbane Lions until he randomly got knocked out by during a game. He just got punched and completely knocked out. There's incredible footage of it. A guy called Brent Staker. And he was just standing there next to the guy, and he just king hit him, and he became just as much famous for that alongside his several years in the AFL. And actually now the captain of the team was actually the younger brother of one of my best mates at high school, and he used to be this annoying little pest. It always used to annoy us when I'd go over to my mate's place and hang out, and he's a pest on the field, and he's bloody good at it. He's played over 300 games, which is equivalent of like probably 15-year career.
And it's a very physical sport.
So anyway, he, so it's kept the soft spot in my heart, and thought I'd put it on when I actually put it on this morning by chance. I'm like, it's a sign. I should be wearing this, and I'm going to wear it on the pod today.
Got to do it. Got to support the hometown. Always remember your roots. And, speaking though, Nick, of exciting competitions, anyone that's listened to the podcast over the summer knows that this year I've tried to make golf a part of my life. Golf lessons, going out golfing, and that extends to actually watching golf content. And for the first time ever, I watched the Ryder Cup. And I don't know if this is going to be considered a bold take or a hot take or not, because I don't know enough of the golf community to know this. After watching the Ryder Cup, I would like to start a petition that all golf should be a team competition. I'm just going to put it out there.
Well, what makes the Ryder Cup so great is that it's novelty value, that the team format isn't played all the time. But I am with you about team golf, actually. So there's a format. I don't know if you've played it, or I think it's called Scramble in the UK, and in Australia it's called Ambrose is the name. It's a completely different name, but it's the same thing. Basically, you play the best shot out of the group and you use a handicap to deduct off your net score. And that format is just so much fun. And I would love to see, basically, you'd play the best shot between a few of you. I think they do one of the games in the Ryder Cup. They might play a best ball
one of the rounds,
one of them. But you can play it as a 4-ball, and it's a load of fun because there's a lot of pressure off until it's on. And what I mean by that is you have 4 shots to make it work on any given hole. But then you might have pressure where it's like, oh, we need this to go in, otherwise we're in trouble. And that extra pressure of having the whole team on your back can be quite a momentous amount of pressure at that given time. So I love the team version of the game, and definitely think it should have a lot more airtime than it does. I actually tuned into the Ryder Cup. I had to I've not really watched them much. So coming from Australia, the Ryder Cup's not as big. We have the President's Cup, which is the internationals versus the Americans. It's nowhere near as big, probably because just the internationals aren't as good as the collection of the Europeans. But at the time when I was growing up, they were. We had some of the greatest players to play the game. We're playing Greg Norman and a bunch of major winners came from Australia, and there was Nick Price and Retief Goose and Ernie Els and all these greats of the game that were playing at the time. So it used to be a really big competition for us to go and support, and I got really into it then. But I only just started watching the Ryder Cup really this year, probably because it was actually on pay TV channels. I never really got the chance to actually watch it.
Yeah.
But this year, again in Sweden, it's with Viaplay. Viaplay is really expensive to sign up for it, and they're making it really hard not to sign up to them. It's almost like there's something in this live sports investment strategy. But again, it's this whole challenge around, okay, I want to watch one event for one weekend, and they're telling me I have to pay the equivalent of like 65 euros, 50 odd pounds a month to sign up for this package that I have no interest in watching after today. But would you, if you maybe pay 20, 30 pounds for the weekend to watch hours and hours, would I? I would definitely think about it as a one-off thing. Anyway, so I couldn't, but I was able to borrow a login that only works on mobile, but not on connected TVs. So you have to be in the same household as the router that's connected with connected TV or something. I can't remember the specifics. So I watched it on my phone. And so I went to bed on Sunday night when, I don't know if we're going down a rabbit hole here, but like the scores was the Europeans were just dominating. Spoiler alert, the Europeans were dominating. But then obviously a huge comeback towards the end. I don't know if you got to watch the very ending, but I ended up
because I'm not currently watching the Bengals, so I was watching the Ryder Cup instead.
So anyway, well, I basically watched it in my room because I couldn't get on the bigger TV. I went to bed, but then thought I'd just watch it a little bit before I went to bed. And then I was glued to my phone in utter darkness because obviously my wife was sleeping at the same time, and I'm just like,
and it's Sweden.
Glued to this. Yeah, and it's Sweden, glued for hours. And I end up going from a very early bedtime to a very late bedtime watching until the result was finally settled, and it was absolutely gripping stuff. I don't think I have watched a sporting event like that, and in terms of being so compelled through the last few hours of that I have in quite a long time, particularly for a tournament, a competition that runs over 70 days.
Yeah. Well, we've talked about our colleague Josh Sim, and the editorial team does his sports wrap up, going through some of the big numbers. It did set record numbers in the UK viewership, so we weren't the only people that found it really intriguing. I think it said, looking at this, it was up 45% in terms of viewership, 8.8 million viewers across the weekend. That's not insignificant numbers. It was down in the US. They, attributed that to the fact that it was not, despite how it ended, was not nearly that competitive throughout the entire weekend. But nonetheless, then the ratings round up. It was, very popular over here. I saw a funny joke was like, do the Europeans have to pick a European venue? Can they just go play back at the same venue in 2027 since they enjoyed it so much? Like, do you have to play in Europe? But yeah, I really enjoyed the format, Nick, having never watched it before. To your point, the pressure, the teammates, it opened up more variables than you get with just sort of, single player scores.
I was actually thinking about this the other day. Can you think of another sport that has such patriotism towards Europe as a collection? I couldn't think of anything that came to mind that there's this competition where everyone basically gets right behind a collection of Europe. I don't know if there's any that exist. If anyone listening can think of any, then let us know. But I think that's another reason why it's such a fascinating competition. It's bringing and uniting the European countries together, which is pretty much, I don't think happens in any other sport to that level anyway.
Yeah, well, speaking of, we're not the only people that think this, and maybe the two are connected or not connected. And you're going to remind me on this, Nick, because this is before my golf days, but apparently there's a revival of the Skins game, which to my understanding is a bit of a Ryder Cup-esque sort of style in terms of team play. But this is going to be revitalized by Amazon, which I find really interesting because it looks like it's going to play over the Thanksgiving weekend. So alongside what we know, we get, the Thursday NFL games on Thanksgiving. Amazon now have the Black Friday games as well. But now we're going to introduce this Skins game with, a number of some of the top golfers in this team setup. So my understanding is this has not been played since 2008. So, nearly 17 years since it's been gone. But, how much of this is people actually like the team style? How much of this is Amazon sees it as a great opportunity to add more coverage around the Thanksgiving day? I don't know, Nick, but it's not going to be the last we're going to see this year of a little more of this style of golf.
Well, the whole idea and concept of skins golf is a little bit akin to the Ryder Cup model of match play golf. It's very similar. And what's great about it is it really puts you against the person that you're playing with in that particular group. And you think about what sports properties and what sports really resonate with audiences and have done for generations and for centuries. It's that one-on-one style sport competition. It could be boxing, it could be tennis, it could be those sports where you're up against another individual. It's like almost like that, going back to the gladiator days, it's one person against one person. Whoever comes out the other side comes out the other end is the victor. And I think this type of format will do really well. My main thing when I see something like this launch is there a commitment to make this a longer term project? Because we've seen so many things come and go. Netflix have done a bunch of different event-based things, and I just then struggle to give it my commitment of time if I know or I don't know if it's a serious play, not just a tool to try and get basically a bit of a quick hit, a bit of a dopamine hit for audiences and so forth, that there's actually going to be something of substance behind it. So I believe that with the different stakeholders involved, with Prime Video getting into it, I think they won't be looking at this as purely a one-off. They want to build something sustainable. And I love the format. It just makes everything so compelling, because even if someone's having a bad hole, that means their round's not over. But likewise, you can see someone have an incredible hole and result, and then someone else has a credible result on the same hole, and it completely nullifies all that great work. It adds such another dimension to the game, and it makes it so much more worth watching. And if they do it for money, even the better.
Yeah. Well, what I find interesting from an Amazon perspective is there's been conversations around slightly different story. Like the NFL, it's so fragmented, but it's like, everyone's got Netflix. So is anyone actually missing out on? Everyone's got Amazon. So they're really missing out on Thursday night football. And I guess the question is, and what we've seen Amazon do, or feels like Amazon does, is they're very selective. They don't always just go in and, get an exclusive broadcast deal with someone. It's always, really selective. So they used to have the Boxing Day with the Premier League. Now they've moved over to the one Tuesday game a week of the Champions League. It's always kind of pick and choose, and there always seems to be a reason for it. I guess my question just sort of be, do they even need it? I'd just be curious, sort of what's the strategy behind it, in the sense of, I'm pretty sure most people probably already have Amazon. I think that's more the question, is the why. What exactly? It feels like Amazon's so just common these days. Are they bringing in any new customers or subscribers with this?
I mean, it's a great question. I think we've got an interview coming out soon where we've talked to someone who's from Sky Deutschland, Charlie Klassen, and he talked much more interchangeably about acquisition and retention, like they were the same objective almost. You're creating content that kind of wants to do both. I think in this instance, we've had the same question, and we're making the same statements about Netflix a few years ago. Why is Netflix needing to buy sports rights that cost a load of money if they already have maximum, a huge maturity of audience? And I think the same thing applies here for Prime. They'll be looking to test out what impact it has on audience behavior, whether that be retention, whether it be acquisition, or whether we just watch time from its existing audience base on a case-by-case basis. Amazon hasn't been afraid to do testing style deals. I just hope it's a longer term play, and they typically have been doing things on a multi-year approach. I remember when I spoke to Marie Donahue, who was leading the Amazon strategy at the time a few years back. The big thing was about they wanted to own a moment, right? And they wanted to own a period of time. And obviously the Black Friday side of things is obviously a huge thing for them because of the commerce aspect of it, right? That is their business. So being attached to Black Friday is such an important thing. And so they would present one pages to Bezos and say, like, here's what we think this is great. Here's what we think is going to move the needle for us. what do you think? And they get the sign off and they go for it. And I think this is just they want to own these moments in the calendar, which can drive ultimately engagement. Some things are just about value for Prime Video. And in this instance, it's a value for the Prime Video customer, but it's also potentially driving customers directly to their biggest, one of the biggest days of the year, driving customers to the platform itself to hopefully convert into some further revenue.
True. It's probably right, Nick. I'll still ask why, but it's probably where the answer's headed. And we've talked about Netflix, we've talked about Champions League. Now the two of them have a bit of again, just all these analogies, all that where there's smoke, there must be fire sort of things. And there's a story coming out, that Netflix is interested in bidding in a UEFA Champions League rights deal. What's been reported is that this would be similar to the approach Amazon did. Those that aren't aware, at least in the UK, Amazon Prime gets their choice of the Tuesday round of games. The rest of them are all with TNT Sports. My understanding is this would not be Netflix coming in for some sort of global exclusive deal for all the Champions League rights, but they want one game per round. Those that aren't aware, the Champions League is massively expanded, the amount of games that it has. So perhaps if Amazon gets their choice of the Tuesday game and TNT gets the rest, it may be this is something like Netflix gets their choice of the Wednesday games and the rest are on TNT. That's just sort of what has been proposed. UEFA is looking for a pretty significant expansion in the rights. My understanding is they're currently around $4.4 billion is their global set of deals. They're looking to push north of $5 billion. So, nice growth, good in there. And, having more competitors and splicing up your packages is one way to do that. That's why the NFL, I think, is so great, is that they're always able to carve out a new package, whether, they had the initial deal, but then they introduce YouTube TV, then they introduce the Netflix, and they're always finding a way to carve deals. So it seems like UEFA is probably trying to take that similar approach to reach north of $5 billion. But what do you think, Nick? Does it make sense for Netflix to take an approach like this? I understand why UEFA would like it, but, does this kind of we want the one game. We don't want the full thing. We just want the one.
Yeah, well, obviously they have been very focused on events-based investments. The most regular investment they have made is in the WWE, right? It's I think it's the Monday Night Raw, I think it is called. I've forgotten which one it is. And that's the closest thing they've got to something that is a regular, recurring entity. And now they've added so many more games. Obviously, their expectation or hope is they will extract more value from the media rights that they now have available. You also have to layer on that team marketing, who have been running those rights for such a long time, have lost those to relevant sports who are based in the US. And I'm guessing they've been very bullish with the commitment they've made financially to having this deal come to the fore. Is that relevant sports believe they can get a big deal out of a streaming partner or two. And naturally, Netflix coming to the fore will be a huge win just for visibility if they can make this commitment for UEFA. The challenge will be for Netflix. They've been very clear, and they're still clear today, about they are, what was the line? Pro-profit, I think the co-CEO used when referring to the expensive nature of sports rights. So they aren't going to be looking to pay a premium for these just so they can say they've got the UEFA rights. It's not in their interest. They will pay what they think is fair market value for them, and definitely no more. So the notion or the story that they are bidding for these rights, yeah, they might be, but they probably have a bid for everything at the right price these days. They've got enough of a breadth of stuff, but they're not going to outbid the bulk of the competition. So I believe that Champions League and the UEFA itself will have to make a commitment. Do we want to basically pull this card, take a haircut on this one game a week, with a view that we can get a streamer on board, potentially get them interested for something bigger down the line, and just create more competitive tension in the market. But otherwise, I don't see Netflix making this play unless it's for a very favorable price for them.
Yeah, well, what's interesting is, I believe his name's Greg Peters is the CEO at Netflix, maybe the co-CEO. He mentioned they were talking about the NFL, and sort of to your point, these events-based things, they're happy with the Christmas day because it's a one big day. And they were saying it doesn't make sense for them in their model, kind of along the lines of you were talking about from a price perspective, of doing these seasonality things. And one of the things they mentioned is partly because they can't actually measure what success would be for that. How many people would actually need to watch, how much money from advertising, what it actually costs to balance that all out. So what I find interesting about the Champions League thing, and we'll talk about the comments separately, if is that just an American approach? I mean, obviously the Champions League is more European, but I imagine it have a global element. Like, are they just saying they don't want to do it with the American business, or because the NFL is just going to be on such a different cost point that, those are separate? But it almost seems like if you don't want to do this seasonality approach, does that almost conflict with the purported interest in the Champions League? Because that would take place basically from September kind of all the way through like Marchish time. Because once you get the knockout stage, I don't think Amazon's involved anymore. So, it's a long time. So I'm just, does it match up with what they're doing? Because you did say they had the WWE, but then on the other side, and probably the more interesting side is, if Netflix is saying they don't know how to measure success, what does that maybe say for everybody else when it comes to bidding for sports rights?
Yeah, I mean, just them saying that blew me away, right? To think about Netflix, one of the most technologically advanced companies in the entire world, would struggle to identify what's providing value and what's not based on having them for a seasonal perspective. But I get the point. I think most people would understand that. And so that's why I think their potential interest, that reported interest in one game a week makes a fair bit of sense. It leans into that event style weekly experience that they've got with the WWE. But I don't think the WWE experience it has started from memory, right? Maybe they've seen that that's worked for them in some capacity, and so they're interested in taking that weekly approach with something without committing to something which is a defined like needle mover for subscribers. Like this, there's no way that this would be a acquisition play for one game a week. This is very much a retention play.
Yeah.
If you are committing such a minimal amount of time, but it can just allow them to build out their catalog of stuff to make people excited and also market more heavily around those events to try and drive people to the platform when those key matchups are happening. Because I believe they had, I'm not sure if you said it, but a selection of the first picks in certain rounds was part of the reported framework. But yeah, I ultimately think they're going to be mentioned in every single global deal now moving forward.
They're the new Apple.
Yeah, the new Apple, but they've actually followed up with delivering and then some, which Apple is still up in the air until this point, until we actually see this movie. I don't know if we weren't going to cover it, but if you've seen recently, then now the report is like that F1 room is still going with them, that they're going to buy those rights. Yeah. But now they want to shut down the F1 TV Pro product as part of that, or maybe integrate into their own platform. Yeah. I mean, how long that rumor mill is going to go is anyone's guess. But anyway, back to Netflix. Ultimately, I think you're going to hear more of these. I think they're up for pretty much buying anything now. Yeah. Netflix for the right price, and they've just said, and you look at their library of stuff from an entertainment perspective, it kind of shows you that they do. So I think that they'll be up for it if UEFA Champions League and indeed relevant sports sees, in my view, sees them taking a haircut on the value of those rights will be worth it in the long term.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. You referenced the interview we did with Charlie Clausen, and to be honest with listeners here, we did that interview about 2 hours ago. So Nick and I, we're just talking ourselves to death here today. But he talked about as well, just sort of the idea that, pay TV, it's not just about the sports, right? You're going to have the family members. You're going to have all the other entertainment. That's where the Netflix side of things comes in, because it's not really about the sports. Sports is actually the minority element of it. I think one of the interesting things about the WWE is, this isn't to get our colleague Steve McCaskill fired up, it's obviously stage. I think WWE has a larger opportunity for playback, video on demand, like catching up on things. Whereas it feels like with live sports, like I'd be curious, and let's just say they have PSG Barcelona on, would that footage then stay on Netflix for me to go watch on demand later, or would it disappear? I've not actually, because I'm not on the WWE platform, I don't know what the on demand accessibility is on Netflix, which would be interesting, because I'm not even sure if I've seen it on Amazon Prime. They'll usually let you start from the beginning. I'm trying to remember if I've ever been able to go back and watch on demand. So that would also be interesting, to sort of the WWE comparison to something live sports.
Now, that's an interesting point. I remember seeing for the Canelo fight that they had recently, the numbers they shared, I think they were about 20% extra, if I remember the number correctly, after the fight. So they were on demand, came afterwards. So that's a decent number, I think, of on-demand consumption. And I did notice for some of their other events that they did have an on-demand access to it, a component to that. It would just ultimately depend on what UEFA's also rights framework is and whether they allow there to be an on-demand component. I would imagine that Netflix wouldn't do that deal without having that available to some capacity, just because seems to be their approach for other sets of rights they've had, other sets of events they've had. So we'll have to wait and see. I kind of like I normally say is I'm kind of excited about it if they do it and they keep making a play in this space. I know that relevant sports will definitely want to get this done, not just from the financial perspective, but also for them to be able to go to the UEFA team in Switzerland and say, hey, look, we've put you on a global scale now that we've never been able to do before by bringing Netflix to the table.
Because remind me, how recently did Relevant take over? We covered that story. It's like, maybe 12
recently.
months ago? It's not been that long, because they had been with, was it team marketing for like the 20, 30 years previous to that?
Yeah, they have been. It was announced, gosh, I'm not actually sure when. Start of this year, end of last year, that they were going to lose those rights, and this was the final cycle. This meant the team basically had to continue with the delivery before stepping away and Relevant taking over this cycle. So it's only fairly recently, and you've seen team marketing therefore have to make a huge pivot. Now, team marketing's legacy is basically they were effectively kind of part of UEFA. That their whole business was built around that UEFA relationship for all of these years, and they were the first to basically create this whole commercial standalone entity at the time that specializes in monetization and commercialization of the sports rights. So they have been built solely on that. So for Relevant to come in and take that has meant that team have really had to start pivoting their approach and business. And I've talked to their CEO previously, and they've been making some changes already in the event that this might happen. I think more recently they've basically been announced, which is a bit of a different play for them, but partnering, I think, with the Ballers League to help them monetize and commercialize globally as well. So it'll be interesting to see if they're able to lean on those existing Champions League relationships they've had with all the broadcast partners and expand the visibility of the Ballers League globally.
Yeah, well, we will follow that story. Like, again, it seems like when we do these news stories, the more cyclical they get, Nick, we can never quite get rid of them. So I'm sure, even we were speaking to Charlie, they've Sky Deutschland is going to have their own conversations to Champions League. So there'll be more stuff to come from those conversations. But moving to the next story, Nick, looking at the ECB, so talking about cricket now, obviously something you're more familiar with, your Australian background. I'm sure our colleague George Breer, who will be in Australia, I think by the time this podcast comes out, we'll be listening to it, because I believe the Ashes is coming up, in December, Nick?
Yep, that's it. I think that's probably one of the reasons you'll see George there, and keep an eye out for him in the live broadcast. He'll be wearing some sort of crazy costume, probably.
Absolutely. But they've come out and they have been talking about their broadcast deal, and they've got a split between sort of free to air coverage and Sky coverage. But I think the thing that you wanted to pull out of this story was them talking about that they think digital clips are arguably as valuable as some of the stuff that they're doing free to air, which I suppose is interesting for an organization like the ECB. And I think the reason you called it out is we've seen people like the NBA really pivot to this sort of the value in digital clips. I think the NBA is probably one of the front runners in terms of embracing some of the content creators, YouTube and things like that. But for someone like the ECB to be kind of pivoting and making these similar comments, it's just a little bit of a change for them in terms of sort of, I guess, their approach before, but just sort of what you took from that story, because you can put it in much better terms than me.
Well, no, there was really two things I took away from it. One is that Adam Silver recently got himself in quite a lot of trouble by saying that, I think he said something about the fact that in the sport's now built for highlights. And given they just done this record media rights tender for 3 times the value for their live rights, didn't go down very well across the industry as almost like a screw you to his partners that they've just invested something that's not as valuable. He has now since come out and said that's not quite what he meant. I think what he was trying to say, the way I actually took it before the world ran with it, was basically
classic.
It's a sport built with loads of highlight moments. I think the word highlight is the misleading part. Loads of moments, right? Loads of things to be excited about through the course of a 2-hour event, not just highlights as they stand on a social media platform. But anyway, hearing him say that, and then hearing the ECB chair come out and say since that they're worth more has been really compelling to hear from two senior leaders that they value the impact social media has so much, and highlights and non-live content, to the growth of their respective sports, because normally the focus has always been on the live experience for so long. And I reflected on that a little bit, and I was starting to think, why would he even say that? I'm not sure this is really the reason, but one of the most interesting things that ECB has done over the last 5 to 10 years, I think 5 years or so, was the launch of the 100 competition, which is, since, for those that aren't familiar with it, is another version of 20 over, or the short version game of cricket, and was recently raised a huge amount of money for private investors to take the competition private in the UK. But their model, which was originally founded with the support of Two Circles in the development of that, was basically built with the mindset of reaching a new type of audience, being very family-centric, focusing on free-to-air reach and highlights and wider visibility, and then commercializing the bulk of that through sponsorships and commercial partnerships, and less about the traditional media rights play. So I wonder whether that is an influence in his comments here, to say that actually we've seen the 100 framework of mass reach, partnering with BBC heavily, giving them a little bit extra visibility and rights. The same with Sky, who's the preeminent cricket broadcaster in the UK. That extra amount of visibility, this can lead to a lot more commercial revenue with the right commercial strategy behind it. And therefore, that's why it is more important, or at least as important, to have the highlights in the right places, reaching the right audiences, and not just the live game itself.
Yeah, and I think to bring us back to the golf we mentioned earlier, when we're talking about cricket, like we are talking about test matches, so we're talking 5 days long. It's even a day longer than the PGA tournaments. It start on a Thursday and end on a Sunday. You'll have some fans that'll watch every shot. You'll have some fans that'll watch every bowl. But the average person does not have 5 days. And I think that's really to say where that value comes in, because your point that Adam Silver comment is there's moments within there. And the average person is just not going to watch 5 days. I mean, they just simply can't get the time off work, don't have other interests. Like, those moments are really valuable, because those are the moments that people are going to engage with, repost, stuff like that, where the live rights are great because it takes up a large chunk of programming time, but how many people actually engage with the full length of that for something that is so long? Like, it does seem like that would place an emphasis on those highlights, because that's really what everyone's going to replay and rewatch.
Well, I would say, in particular with things like Test cricket, which goes over 5 days, again, a bit like the Ryder Cup, which goes over a number of days as well, people are basically keeping an eye out because they want to follow it. They're passionate about the sport. So they might be consuming a dozen different highlights. Could be wickets, could be shots that are played in cricket. But ultimately, they're also keeping half an eye out to see if it's worth watching the end of the event, to see what the conclusion is. A bit like what the NBA tried as well. They tried fourth quarter pay-per-view. Basically, you could buy access for the final quarter. And I haven't heard much mentioned about that since. But that type of idea of people will keep an eye out for something that's highly visible. And then if it's getting to a point where there's enough tension there to make it really compelling viewing, I'm going to tune in and watch. And I think Test cricket is beautifully built for that. I'm sure people are watching, keeping an eye on it, whether it's through work and life and social. And then on the final couple of days where they see it's getting towards crunch time, because that's the thing with cricket, it's really ridiculous. It could take 3 days and come to a crunch moment, or it could take 5 days, even though it's a 5-day event. But I'm not going to bore people with explaining why and how that works. But keeping an eye on things, because if it does get to a crunch moment, then I can just tune on and actually watch it and focus my attention, because the reality is no one is going to sit there and watch 5 days. I did when I was a kid. That's because I probably didn't have a babysitter, and that was my babysitter for 5 days. So a little bit different, but on school holiday breaks. So a little bit different times back then.
Fair. I mean, I was the same way. It reminds me of the old days, classic Sports Center, when it's just highlights. You put that on TV during the summer holidays, basically from like 8 till 11, I'm just going to watch Sports Center for 3 straight hours. We had a babysitter, but like wasn't doing much, just me watching the same highlights for 3 hours over and over again.
But look, ultimately, I think the ECB and any cricketing nation will struggle so much to get media rights return out of Test cricket these days. We've just seen it's basically the sport is nearly dead. The Ashes cricket is probably the only exception. from the rest of them. Otherwise, there is some small other tournaments or other test series that do okay, but ultimately they're just too long to drive enough needle moving attention. So instead, the highlights probably are more valuable to them in a multitude of ways. And it doesn't surprise me they made those comments, but it is just another reminder of the power of non-live, particularly in a sport that's aging as much as cricket is.
Yeah. Well, speaking of, maybe aging sport isn't the right way to do it, but a sport that certainly coming under a lot of shift. And the last thing we'll kind of talk about today, we've touched on it a little bit, is just sort of the end of pay-per-view. Our Ed Dixon from our editorial team recently wrote a piece. It is definitely worth going in depth as he kind of talks through sort of the individual pieces that has led to the end of pay-per-view. Part of it being, the UFC taking a step, part of it being the Saudi Arabia funding and what they're trying to do with Riyadh seasons. Part of it is actually longer than that. Ed actually goes back to say that, DAZN declared boxing dead in 2018 when, DAZN wanted to make, subscriptions a thing, so some of this, it feels like Nick boxing has changed really quickly in the last 6 months, but maybe someone like DAZN always kind of envisioned it. And then there's the ties between Saudi Arabia and DAZN and all those sorts of things. But it's a nice, really sort of in-depth article, kind of what are the different factors at play? How long has some of this been going? Why did we get to this point? And is pay-per-view actually dead? And like I said, we covered it with the UFC story with the Paramount Plus partnership, we should say. But just, going back on that, Nick, a little bit and just sort of looking through it, do you think one plays a bigger factor than the others for the rights holders going to the new model or the new upstart competitions, or whether it's the introduction of new or broadcasting partners where, they want in on the action? Just, what's your take, Nick?
Well, I definitely recommend people taking some time to read the article that Ed put together. It's really comprehensive. Ultimately, I think that boxing has been, and in many ways this happens right across sports, but boxing has been struggling its way through. I don't know if struggling is the right word, but like finding its way through troubled waters for some time. They haven't been unified in the way they approach promotions and stuff. Is so antiquated, and there's no way that it is built for the good of the game and the good of the sport, and it has the right structure in place to be able to focus on all stakeholders up and down that spectrum. So whether it be fans to the pro athletes to the amateurs, etc., it's not built the right way. I think the shift away from pay-per-view will definitely help its visibility, the interest in the sport, and will mean they have to take a very different approach to sponsorship and revenue generation. It'll be a lot more work for the athletes themselves to also generate more income, because these days they are just basically quite often given just a cut of pay-per-view revenue. It's a pretty fundamental shift. Now, some people are saying this is not, it was A, inevitable, but B, cyclical, so it'll come back and you'll see pay-per-view make a return. I only see that really happening is if you have a truly marquee matchup popping up out of somewhere after it goes through a state of revolution and people start to, and some consolidation in the way basically the boxing is delivered. But until then, I think pay-per-view in this world is pretty difficult to see working for boxing at the premiums they were charging at a much lower price point and pennies to the dollar, so to speak, of what they've been charging. Maybe, but I think they can open up a whole new set of fans by moving away from pay-per-view, and that's going to be quite exciting for all the stakeholders across UFC and boxing.
It will be interesting. I almost view, and I think Ed touches a little bit this sort of angle, it almost feels like a Spotify moment where the fans love Spotify, the labels love Spotify, but there's been a lot of reports that the artists don't actually like Spotify. It doesn't necessarily reward you financially the same way, just the way the algorithm pays out and things like that, where it's the same way for the athletes, where before it was a share of pay-per-view, right? So if you're Floyd Mayweather, you're going to drive those numbers. If you remove the pay-per-view, and again, that's not really something that's going to necessarily be the media side a little bit, probably not for us. We're not going to figure it out. But like, does that eventually become a thing where it's like, hey, let's just say the next Floyd Mayweather, because I don't know who the next big name in boxing is going to be, but becomes that guy. And he says, I don't want to do this. I'll be curious, because I think we see those struggles even in like the NFL, or we're seeing it right now in the WNBA, where players want a larger cut of the TV revenue. We're going to go and have our collective bargaining agreement. As far as I'm aware, I'm not aware of there being a players union, a fighters union, or something like that. But I'm sure that is going to have to be a part of this conversation as things go on to figure that out. Particularly, like I said, if I'm Joe Burrow or I'm, old school Aaron Rodgers, top of my game, I don't want to lose my potential earnings so that I can look out for some 6th round rookie draft pick. So it will be interesting how some of that plays out and whether if it's good for him, bad for him, maybe it's more unionized, but I think that's an interesting part of this all.
Super interesting. I have no idea how it's going to go, but it will need to change. And I think it'll take some time to get there because at the moment, all the power's with the promoters. And that isn't really a healthy approach to it. And the World Boxing Federation is under huge scrutiny. I mean, we could talk about another hour about boxing's state of play, but it is a absolute mess. So I mean, hopefully this might help democratize it. I'm just intrigued to see whether the typical, what do they call it when they the standoff where they have at the
the way off.
The way off,
the way in. That's what it is.
The way in and the standoff they have normally. They stand nose to nose.
Yeah.
Whether that changes because they don't need to worry about like selling pay-per-view anymore because it was all about basically I'm going to kill that guy, basically blah 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 blah, and that's because they wanted to get people excited about enough to buy a pay-per-view. Yeah. Whether that might just calm down those things or whether they'll still buy into making a big deal on stage or not. So a lot of revolution needed in boxing as a business, that's for sure.
Absolutely. Well, everyone, we appreciate you taking the time to join us. Like you said, the next coming weeks, we have the interview with Charlie Clausen, who's the EVP of sports at Sky Deutschland. We also have David Salmon. I believe his title is officially like he's the international vice president, international director of sports for Tubi. So we do have some interviews coming up that align with the upcoming Sports Pro Media Summit, which if you don't know about, you need to know about. We've been saying lots of marketing emails with discounts. Maybe drop Nick or I a message if you missed one of those newsletter emails with a discount code, and we'll see what we can hook up for you.
Thanks, everyone.